All right, what's good in the hood? In this video, I'm going to be looking at the aspect of activity in the fighting game. I'm going to be looking at both the pros and the cons of being an active and an inactive fighter. Without further ado, I'm going to jump into the first category, being active, the pros. Okay, first things first, buzz. The sport is all about capturing the attention of the fans, and what better way to do that is by creating buzz. By create buzz, I mean you got to create moments. You gotta draw their attention and their interest one way or another. There's many ways to look at this. If you fight frequently, you're probably gonna have a higher chance of having an amazing finish that goes viral, an amazing intro that goes viral, or frankly you're just going to have a war. You're going to have an amazing fight. Either way, you're going to start to draw the attention of the fans versus if you're only appearing, once every 5 months, every 7 months, let alone once every year. So it's all about keeping, you want to, if you're a new fighter with no name, it's paramount that you want to get beyond that stereotypical, you have 20,000 followers on your social media and no one knows who you are, and that's why they inherently have to put you in the undercard versus you're a Payne Talbot and you have 200 plus thousand followers and people are calling you, overrated and this and that, but it doesn't matter. You have attention, and sure, he wasn't necessarily active, but you get the point. You want to get to a point like him where you have a following and the UFC recognizes that and recognizes that you could be a future cash cow. In addition, this will actually play into the second point, climbing the rankings. If you're active and you're fighting, like I said, on average 3-4 times a year, similar to my boy right here on the left, Waldo Cortez Acosta, this is going to have huge dividends, assuming you're a decent fighter and you win more than you lose. Sure, he lost once in 2025, but he won, was it 4 times? And he's already got another win in 2026. His ranking has jumped like 6 or 7 spots, which is huge because before that, like I said, he was, I think, outside the top 10. And let's be real, if you only fight 1 or twice a year and you're losing, maybe one out of those 2, your ranking might only go up 1 or 2 spots within that year, which is still fantastic, but it's a little slow. And if you're trying to push for that, to get into that elusive top 5 in your division, elusive top 10, being active, even if you don't necessarily get guys that are above your rankings, if you capture yourself into the rankings or you're hovering right outside and you start getting a couple wins, they're going to have to eventually, consider you and push you in. Lastly, this is, again, probably more so for the bottom tier folk, because let's be real, you don't make shit in the UFC until you actually either get a championship belt, or because pay-per-view's dead now, you have to get the championship belt, or you have to eventually get to some sort of 125 and 125, or get a flat 250 plus rate, which you got to be pretty deep in the UFC to get to that. So we're going to assume that you're coming to the UFC, you're probably making, was it 15 or 16 and 16, maybe whatever, 20 and 20. So it's pretty dirt cheap. And the quicker you fight, the quicker you can burn out your contract. And assuming you're winning and you're making that buzz and you're climbing the rankings, they're going to have to give you a better contract. You might be able to negotiate something sweeter, if you're like 2 or 3 fights from your contract ending, because they want to get ahead and never have you run out, where you can then go join the B League of PFL. So that's good because you'll get quicker paychecks and eventually your contract will improve, assuming you're doing your job. And those paychecks will then start paying in increased dividends, for, let's say, the next year. So being active, I think, has a lot of pros, that especially as an up-and-comer. And Chimaev was a perfect example of this. He fought 2 times in, was it less than 2 weeks? And in that period, he fought 3 times in 2 months. Huge budget, especially during the COVID era. And he got finishes on top of it. So that was money for him. All right. But on the flip side, I'm gassing out already. Being active, there are some cons. First and foremost, you're not probably going to be competing at 100%. That's just the reality of it. The more times you have to go through a weight cut and the more fight camps you're going through, especially if they're intense fight camps, you're really facing tough opposition, as these boys on the left did, you're most likely going to come in either sick, you're going to have some ailments that you pushed off. You might have a minor surgery you could have done, but you chose not to. There's a lot of factors you have to consider, and the reality is that's a danger that you have to weigh when you choose to fight someone when you might not be ready to fight them. Streak killer. Obviously, it's not as paramount as it is with boxing, but having a streak is a nice little marketing tool to have. Not to mention, no one ever wants to have losses. Think Marab, he had losses, but he had, 15 fights in a row. And then on his 4th title defense, he finally loses that streak. And he wasn't even that healthy, I believe. I think he was either partially sick going into that fight camp with Peter Yan. Nonetheless, if he didn't be as active, he probably would have had the longest streak, tied with Islam and, record-wise and all that stuff. But he gave that up in favor of trying to be the most active champion with the most title defenses, which I respect, but it was definitely something that he took a lot of risk on. And then lastly, this one's kind of ambiguous because it's not necessarily bad being a company man, but I'm going to go on limb and say, and I think of someone like, I don't know, I don't want to say Volk, but it's like you start to be active and then they start to almost expect, especially when you hold the belt, they start to almost like expect you to be someone that they can hot dial if you're a contender, like I said, for backup fights, championship. If they need a main event, they're going to start to expect you, and if you don't hold that end of the bargain, I feel like you're going to get some almost bad limelight, or even then, regardless of that, even I think if you start to feel like you're the company man, you almost have this internal like expectation duty to serve them when they come calling, which isn't, again, a bad thing, because you're going to get paid and you're probably going to get handed a short-term nice opportunity, but it does come with that risk of just you're not necessarily in the mood to fight. You're not ready to fight. But next thing you know, you're being summoned, as Volkanovski did, to fly over and take a very risky fight against a very elite competition in Islam. And you see how his career went right after that. All right, moving on. Inactive. There are some pros to being inactive. I think first and foremost, and Colby Covington, maybe he's just an anomaly, but I'll use him as a reference point. You get to preserve your rankings / your belt. And what I mean by this is if you're not as active, if you choose to be inactive, meaning you might fight once a year, you might fight once every 6 to 9 months, the real benefit of that, I think, is the fact that once you gain the rankings or even the belt and they're not willing to strip you, John Jones, you can really kind of play it around and make sure that you're always fighting on like either the best available cards, either distance wise or just if there's a lot of like hype to it, let's say Madison Square Garden, or you're just going to be able to pinpoint and try to get an opponent that you want to fight. And there's huge benefits to that because, again, being in the rankings is very valuable if you're trying to chase the championship or get bigger fights with bigger names, up the totem pole. And if you have the belt, you obviously never want to lose it because you're getting paid more and you're the cream of the crop. So you got to be careful. And therefore, if you fight less or you try to pick your spot, then most likely you're going to come in a lot fresher, which goes into my second point. You're going to have a lot more recovery to good old CTE. Let's be real. All these fighters, outside of very few exceptions, every time they go through a training camp, they're taking a beating. Every time they go through a fight, they're taking a real beating. And that, like I said with my prior point, is it's going to take a toll on your ability to have good camps. And when you're at the cream of the crop, you're at the top of the division, you want to have good camps because you might be fighting a competition that is very stylistically tough on your matchup. Or I don't know, you're going to have to get very diverse with your training camp. And if you're coming in to a camp partially injured, not motivated, etc., then it's not going to go well. And last but certainly not least, and again, we allude back to our friend John Jones. If you're not active, if you choose to be inactive, it could just be because you want to avoid the current matchups and the killers that are presented for them. Let's be real. If you wait a little bit, that guy that is stylistically a bad matchup for you, he may end up fighting someone else and losing. ... If you know, you know. And if that happens, then you can reappear as needed and, rebook a fight, this or that, whatever it may be. And you might be able to avoid a guy for one reason or another, or they get hurt, like I said, they lose and they're no longer credible enough to fight you anymore. And you can move on with your day and not risk, like I said, going on a match that you might lose. But yes, let's move on. All right, last but not least, being inactive, the cons. And these ones are extremely relevant because, let's be real, Mazar Evlev, he just actually had a fight booked, was it today, for end of March. And our friend Armand is still waiting for his next fight. This goes back to my original point. The biggest pro to being active is the aura farming, creating buzz. So obviously if you're inactive and you're not in a special position like the ones we said before, like a John Jones, a only certain people can be inactive and always keep that presence and that excitement with the fans. But if you're not active and you don't really have a mega name, then fans are going to forget about you. And UFC is a business first and foremost. If they view you as no longer a hot commodity because you don't draw numbers on the social metrics, whatever it is, they don't think you can draw tickets for an event, fight night, etc., then they're going to forget about you. And they're not going to maybe want to book you for matches that help push you towards, let's say, the championship. And they might actually want to put you in fights that help build up other, prospects that they're looking at. Again, I use someone like Mazar Evlov, who, last year, at the start of last year, he was pretty much on track to challenge Volkanovski for the belt. He didn't get the shot, and then he got injured and missed out his fight with the debuting Aaron Pico. And now it's almost been, 14, 15 months. And now he's got to go fight another number one contenders match against Lerone Murphy, which is, he's taking another risk where he's already been the uncrowned number one contender for a while. And some of it's not his fault, but again, we don't really know why he's been inactive. Could be injuries, could be not getting offered a lot of fights. It's really unclear. On the flip side, we know Arman, to a degree, chose not to be active in 2025. He got his funky back injury, doing his thing with Nina Drama. But afterwards, he just didn't fight until, November against Dan Hooker. So he chose, and before that, he was very inactive. So it had been like over a year since he fought. And he's actually curving around by using his food diaries to actually stay active in the fans' eyes with his entertainment. So he's actually countering what is currently the biggest con, which is the lack of trend, because people haven't seen this guy fight in so long outside the Dan Hooker fight. But yeah, that is really detrimental. On top of it, and Arman is a prime example of this, you're wasting your prime years. If you're a fighter and you're the number one contender, if you're the number two, if you're a champion like Henry Cejudo and you're choosing not to fight, and it's not because you're retired or anything, well, I guess he was retired, but he didn't come out, so he wasn't truly retired. But in the case of like Arman, you're in the prime of your career. Sure, you didn't get offered the title shot because you blew your back out. My back don't work no good, no more, need a drama. Yes, he chose not to take presumably some contenders. I think he was offered guys like Gamrot last summer and this and that. Yeah, he chose not to fight them because he felt he was deserved the title shot against Ilya or Islam, etc. But you're wasting your prime years, my brother. Sure, you can go wrestle in the RAF, you can go do all your thing, karate combat, but at the end of the day, UFC is the pinnacle of the sport, and if you're an MMA fighter, that's where you need to be. And the longer you wait, the worse off it's going to be for your potential when you do return. And now you've, like I said, it's not as bad for Arman, but I think of something like Cejudo, where you wasted 2-3 years of your best of your career, and you come back and you're a shell of your former self. And last but certainly not least, losing status in both the rankings and the UFC brass. The longer you don't fight, the more they'll slowly trickle you out. Maybe not in the case of like Arman or even Masvidal, because they still seem to be staying in that top 3. But if you're like, let's say 6 or 7 in the rankings and you don't fight for a while, those other guys ahead of you and behind you are going to be fighting. And the ones that do win and do progress in the rankings, they're going to take your spot. And that's the worst thing that can be, I think, is the case of like, you earned your spot. Let's say you're a young up and coming guy and you come from some wild promotion bumfuck, and you finally get into that top 15, and then for one reason or another you're not fighting for a year, and you were in that 14 spot after winning 6 fights in your day since your debut, and now you're unranked, and now you don't get to qualify because no guy wants to fight you because they don't have a number on your name. Now you gotta go fight some dangerous random guy instead of go fight a gatekeeper that's number 10. There's a big risk of that. And then obviously that's the sports side of things. The business side of things is, if you're inactive, you're not active. I'm gonna blow my brains out saying those 2 words. If you're inactive, at the end of the day, the UFC brass is it's just not good for them because you are a commodity for them to grow their business. And if you don't fight a lot and you don't have any sort of other tangible aspect that they can monetize, and again, that could be like shows, that could be your social media. What say you? I think of someone like Robert Whitaker, right? He's been a little inactive since his last fight, this and that. And he doesn't seem like he's going to be fighting anytime soon, but he does do, commentary and this and at the after show when they go down under, and he does other, interviews and this, that. So he helps with the promotion of the UFC. But yeah, if you're not active, you're just like a detriment for the UFC at the end of the day. You're just a spot on their roster, and there's all these hungry guys, and they recognize these guys will do all sorts of things to get into the UFC and to get the spot when there's only 12 pay-per-views a year, 12 number events, and they're not gonna want to consider you for those big cards and this and that. If there's other guys that are doing their job and fighting frequently. That's my thoughts. I think activity is something that's a hotly debated topic. It's not always cut and dry as you should be active, end of story. But at the end of the day, you got to, I think, weigh your position and weigh what your goals and kind of where you are. And a lot of it will probably come down to the fact that if you're financially poor and in that position, then you more likely than not, you're probably going to want to take a fight. Let me know in the comments. Subscribe if you enjoyed this. Like if you enjoyed this. And comment your thoughts. And tune in for some new videos later this week.